You might have just gotten a camera and now it's time for you to use it. However, you don't know anything about it? Well, let me see if I can help you learn the basics. Within a camera, there's 3 fundamental things you absolutely need to know from pure instinct to actually be able to use a camera for photography. So grab a snack and listen up. These 3 things are shutter speed, aperture and ISO. Let me make an example. 2 sec.
What can I use? What can I use? What can I use?
This is the PC. It should be able to run games, creative apps and all sorts of things. However, it can't do that all on its own. It does at least need a screen or maybe 2, so you're actually able to see what's happening on the computer. And it also needs something to control it, which is where a keyboard and mouse comes in. With these 3 components, your PC now functions as intended. The same goes for your camera. Here you need to adjust your shutter speed, aperture and ISO to the right positions for you to properly expose your image and get a great result. These 3 factors is forming the phenomenon known as the exposure triangle. You'll almost always need to keep these factors somewhat balanced to expose your image perfect. However, keep in mind that there's always exceptions, but I won't touch on them in this video. This is purely the basics. So let's take a look at shutter speed. This aspect of the exposure triangle mainly affects movement and how blur and sharpness is captured in an image. As an example, I'll set my shutter speed to 1/150th of a second and then I'll capture a picture of me running. To actually see the difference, I'll then capture the exact same picture just with a shutter speed of 1/640th of a second. Shutter speed is basically determining how much time the shutter should stay open for. The longer it stays open, the more blur is captured, which can be seen in the first image where my arms and legs aren't that visible. However, in the second image, everything is tack sharp, almost kinda clinically. This happens because the shutter opens and closes super fast, which captures the picture instantly instead of giving it some time before it closes again. So, the faster the shutter closes, the sharper the image. The slower it closes, the more blur in the image. If you're looking to capture star lapses or nicely flowing waterfalls, then you'll usually have to have the shutter open for maybe seconds or even minutes, which is quite a long time, but it can create some beautiful and probably unique looking images. I will say though, remember a tripod, because a shaky star lapse doesn't look that great. I'm talking from experience. Damn. Slower shutter speeds like 1/150th of a second is usually used for portraits or images where the subject doesn't move that much. Faster shutter speeds like 1/1000 is usually used in motorsports photography where the subject or object is moving really fast, but you want to make it super sharp. Enough about shutter speed, let's get to the next one, which is aperture. This aspect of the exposure triangle controls both how much light gets into the sensor and it also controls the depth of the image, which is how much blur can be created in the foreground or background from your subject. Aperture is usually shown on your camera as an F and a number. The lower the number, the faster the aperture is. If you have an f-stop number of, for example, f2.8, it lets in a lot of light so you can bump up this shutter speed and get a sharper image. With this low f-stop number of f2.8, you're also able to create a much shallower depth of field than, for example, what you can create with a f22, where everything within the frame is visible. A low f-stop is usually desired by most photographers since you're able to create some pretty unique photos with more shallow depth of field and faster shutter speeds. But it can be quite expensive to get a lower f-stop number, because the way you get that is by switching out lenses for your camera. Lenses usually comes in 2 different types, zooms like this one or prime lenses. Zoom lenses tend to be more expensive, but they're also more versatile since you are able to zoom in and out to cover a wider focal range, which you can't do with a prime lens. Prime lenses, however, are great at letting in a lot of light to the camera sensor since they usually can go down to a much lower f-stop number like f1.2, which simply isn't possible on a zoom lens. So they have their ups and downs. I'm usually more of a zoom guy, but you'll have to try different types of lenses to figure out which you like better and also which use cases you'll want to use them for. But everything regarding lenses is trial and error, plus some personal preference. So rent or buy some different types if you have a camera housing that supports it. Let's unfold the last missing piece of the puzzle, which is ISO. It mainly controls light. ISO is mostly used in places with not a lot of light, like my office here as an example. If you bump up the ISO, then it becomes brighter. However, it's quite dark in my office right now, which means that it isn't because I turned on a light source of any kind. So this is also the reason why ISO is referred to as fake light. This generally means that if you have dialed in your shutter speed and aperture, but still need some more light, you can bump up the ISO and then everything will become brighter. But at the cost of some noise in your image, which you usually don't really want. So the higher you bump up the ISO, the more noise you'll also introduce into your image. So try to keep the ISO number as low as possible most of the time. However, here in 2024, it ain't that big of a problem anymore, since we have so much software with all kinds of integrated AI features to remove noise from the images. Most photographers use Lightroom these days, or more specifically, a lot of them uses Lightroom Classic, but that's mostly because you're able to store files locally, so that's more of a personal preference. But with either of these softwares, you're actually able to remove a lot of the noise from your pictures today, just by dragging a slider, which is so useful. So bumping up the ISO used to be a big problem, but in my opinion, it ain't that big a deal anymore because of all the AI software that already exists and are coming in the near future. So don't worry about bumping up the ISO, kind of do as you please. But if you want the best image straight out of the camera, then keep the ISO low. That's my advice. Now that you understand these core principles within your camera, I'll just encourage you to go out there and practice. It's the only way to actually become a better photographer. There'll always be beginners to the field of photo and video, so I'll try to sprinkle in some learn the basics videos here and there. If you liked this video, I would greatly appreciate it if you would leave a like and subscribe to my channel down here somewhere. Other than that, I'll just say, see you next time. I'm out.